You're listening to Booked, the Bookstore education podcast brought to you by the American Booksellers Association. This week, we're tuning into sessions from the Events University presented at Children's Institute 2019 in Pittsburgh, starting with in-store and off-site author events.
Hi, everybody. We're going to get started. Thank you all for coming to Events University today. We're very excited to be the first panel. We're going to talk about a lot of different things about events today, but I just wanted to start by us introducing ourselves. My name is Erica Barmash, and I'm the Senior Director of Marketing and Publicity at Bloomsbury Children's.
I'm Steph Appel. I'm the Director of Books and Events for Young Readers at Parnassus Books in Nashville, Tennessee.
I'm Heather Hebert. I am the owner-manager of Children's Book World in Haverford, Pennsylvania.
And I'm Alex Schaffner, and I'm events co-director at Brookline Booksmith, and I do all of our kids' events.
And just before we get started, just a general reminder to turn off the sound on your phones in case you've forgotten. I always do. And so we've prepared a little bit of an overview to start with, just to give you guys an idea of what we're going to be talking about today. So we're going to start by talking about in-store events, working with publisher. I'll be chiming in a lot about that, managing expectations, and all of the details and things that go along with that. Then we'll talk about off-site events. And then we'll talk a little bit about logistics. And so there will be time for questions after each section. So there's going to be plenty of time for you guys to ask anything you want.
Should you go over the things that we can and can't talk about part?
Oh, yeah.
Right, yes. And we have to say our thank yous.
Yes.
Okay. So it is very important that there are a few guidelines of things that we cannot. These are the antitrust guidelines. There can be no discussion of pricing or pricing policies. There can be no discussion of boycotts, and there can be no discussion of dividing up a market. So just keep that in your mind, please, when you're talking. Some of us on the panel might have gotten in trouble for that before.
And of course, we want to thank the lead sponsor of Ci7, Baker & Taylor, for all of their support of this event and the whole conference.
Yeah, let's clap for Baker & Taylor.
Okay, so before we sort of get into the nitty-gritty, we did want to talk about that there are some things to keep in mind before you start planning. Probably the most important thing is to be realistic about what you can do, and to be honest with yourself about what you can do. And just from a publisher perspective, you know, we want you guys to be honest and realistic. If you have to say no to something or you don't think something we're suggesting is going to work, we're very, very open to hearing that. And so we wanted to start off by everyone taking a minute and just thinking of an event idea. So we're going to come back to this idea throughout the presentation as we talk about different things. So just come up with an idea, just a quick note. It can be a blue sky idea. It can be sort of an expanded version of an event you've hosted in the past, or just sort of your typical event, and you might rethink how to do that. So we'll give you a minute. Okay. So we're going to start by talking about in-store events. And so we're going to sort of proceed from the idea that you've confirmed the author event, you've talked to the publisher, then what happens? And so when you're approached by a publisher, we should be able to give you certain things. We should be able to give you why we've approached you for this event. Why we've decided to host an event in your city. Does the author have local connections? Have they been to your store before? Did we pick you just because we've seen that you've done successful events that are similar? And we should also be able to give you what kind of expectations we have for the event. So is the author local? Are we expecting to bring in lots of friends and family? Or are we sort of putting the onus on social media and outreach that way? And you should always feel comfortable to ask the publisher these types of questions. And so it's really important to think of the publisher as your partner. we want to define what successful means together, and successful can mean different things. You know, for some events, maybe it means hundreds of people. For other events, maybe it means 20 people, and it's just that they're all really excited and invested. You know, we know our authors and we know what they're expecting. But we also have a realistic approach to it as well. You know, a publisher isn't going to expect the same kind of crowd for a debut author as they would expect for someone who sold millions of copies. So don't be afraid to be honest with us. And don't be afraid to talk to us, especially if, you know, you might be working with a newer publicist who doesn't necessarily know your store as well, or doesn't necessarily know the expectations as well. You know, there's definitely always going to be experience gaps on either side. And I think communication is probably the most important thing. Do you guys want to share anything that you say when you're communicating with publishers and asking those questions?
Yeah, we'll just go down the line. So, what Erica is saying about the things that a publisher or a publicist should be able to tell you is 100% true. It's been my experience that those are often questions that I have to ask. It doesn't come included in the, Dear Stephanie, John Smith would like to visit Parnassus on blah, blah, blah day. And so, there are different things that we ask depending on essentially how we think we're going to get people to the store. So at Parnassus, we've found that a lot of people often have random connections in Nashville. And it never hurts to ask that. Sometimes it's like, oh, well, the author's husband went to Vanderbilt and is very active in the alumni organization. That's not necessarily even something that the publicist is going to know up front. But by asking that question, we're causing the publicist to go back and question the author, like, do you have a plan for how you're going to draw people to this event in this market? Sometimes, especially recently, it's been like authors are cultivating like fan lists and fan groups, and they're gathering information from their readers about where they live. And their readers are saying, like 30 of their readers are saying, we live within an hour's drive of Nashville and we would love for you to come to Parnassus. And if you do, we'll come. And again, that's not necessarily something that the publicist might have asked the author up front. So asking those kinds of questions is, one of our first responses if that's not in the initial pitch email. The other thing that we always do is just sort of feel out like where the bar for success is. We use a lot of language like it's so important for us that every event in our store feels successful for everyone. Sometimes we'll even go further and be explicit, not just the publisher, not just Parnassus, but also the author and the attendees. My boss, our events director, even throws in a line like, it's the worst thing in the world for an author to walk out to an empty bookstore. Putting that visual in the publicist's head can be sometimes like the nudge that you need. And so you can ask either, what's a typical audience size if it's not a debut author, that this author has been drawing in similar markets, right? Because we don't want to know that 150 people came to see them at Barnes & Noble in New York because Nashville is not New York. But if they got 30 people in Oxford, Mississippi, that's a pretty similar market to us. Or you can say something like, we feel that a successful author event is at least, and it's helpful to give an actual number, 35 people in the store attending the event with proportional book sales. Do you feel that by doing X, Y, and Z, and of course Parnassus will promote the event through all of our usual channels, we could reach that goal together? And then if unfortunately the event is underattended, you can at least feel secure that you are upfront in saying, we consider a successful event to be this number of people. And unfortunately, we didn't accomplish that this time. So those are the two main kinds of questions that we ask, because it's been our experience, just the kind of town that Nashville is. People have a lot of random connections, and by being upfront with the publicist and the author that it's important for them to tap those connections, and tapping those connections will actually bring people to the bookstore, you can have a really successful event.
It's also important. I mean, I think we're sort of honesty goes a long way. As simple as, saying to the publisher, we're desperate to have John Smith, but that's the week of standardized testing.
Yeah.
And can we maybe do it the week before or the week after? Because we'll get many more people and many more educators. They want to know that too. As excited as you get and you want to say yes to everything, and trust me, I'm like the woman who can't say no when it comes to events. You do want it to be successful, and you want to be successful for everybody. So if it would be more successful the week after spring break than the week when everybody's gone, it's fine to tell the publisher. I mean, they want to hear that. It's also okay to say no, which is really hard. And I know a lot of us don't want to do it, but sometimes it's better and it means more to the publisher, that honesty that, you know what? No, we don't actually have the market, or that's not an author that really does well here, or we'd be better suited for a different kind of event. That kind of honesty goes a long way. So don't be afraid. You don't have to take every little thing that comes your way. Take things that you feel good about and that you want to be successful with, would be my advice.
And I just wanted to jump in too from the publisher perspective. Oftentimes when we're planning tours, we sort of have like a 2 to 3 week window that we're looking at. So if we hear, okay, well, that week's bad, then we'll say, okay, well, maybe we won't go to Philly that week. We'll go to Philly the next week. Or if it's just not going to work, we might say, okay, Nashville's not going to work on this tour. Hopefully we'll be doing more events with this author for their next book, and we'll keep publishing with them. So we'll put a pin in Nashville and, do it next time.
Can I?
Yeah.
So I just want to sort of add to the idea of honesty is that you are also trying to build relationships. So your honesty should be leavened by diplomacy, because publicists are people and they can take offense. So that is actually a really important part of building your event series, is making sure that even when you have to say no to people, part of what you're doing is building trust with the publishers. And I think everybody has that go wrong sometimes. Sometimes they don't want you to say no when you say no. Sometimes you just can't give them what they want, and that's sort of just the reality. But really focusing on trying to have sort of an open dialogue where nonetheless you're trying to be very nice about the whole thing is really important. And I had something else to say, but I don't remember what it was.
I wrote down 2 things. If I say them and then keep thinking and try to remember.
Yes, that sounds good.
So another thing to look at when you're approached and you're trying to decide, do I think that I could do this in a way that would stand its best chance to be successful, is what else is on your calendar. So for example, if you're hosting John Green, you probably don't want to have another YA event that week or maybe the week after, because John Green is going to saturate potentially the audience of YA fans in your area for a little while. And that is I have been perfectly transparent with publicists about that. I'm extremely apologetic. But there are only 365 days in a year, and I'm also booking against an adult events calendar, and I can't control who pitches me what and when. And then the other thing that occasionally happens is a publisher will offer you the opportunity to host an author because you've hosted authors, especially their authors, successfully, and they're like, oh, well, Danielle Smith is a really similar author and fan base to Susie Jones, and they had 60 people for Danielle Smith. And what they may not know is that Danielle Smith lived in your market for 5 years, or her best friend's aunt is a real social butterfly in your town and got 60 people to your bookstore. And so sometimes they're approaching you because they're looking at their internal comps and they don't have the context. And so I tend to just sort of be upfront and press for more information to try to get to, why are they offering me this person? Why did they think I can be successful? And do I agree with their reasoning?
Oh, I thought of my other thing, which is basically, there are three main driving forces in an event's success. One is the store's outreach, one is the publisher's outreach, and one is the author's outreach. So no matter what size of an event you're saying yes or no to, one thing to check on is how engaged you feel the author is, whether that's offline in their local community or whether it's online with 17,000 Instagram followers. So that it's worth, you don't have to go directly to the publicist for that. You should take a look on your own and see what you think the author themselves is going to bring to the table in terms of promotions.
Yeah. And just to add in one more thing about honesty, which we're going to probably keep hammering on about, when you're giving that information to the publicist of why you don't think the event might be a good fit, I think it's important to remember that that information is really helpful to the publicist because they're going back to other people at the publisher. They're going back to the author. And it's really helpful to be able to say, like, look, they can't do it because they have John Green the night before. Or, they can't do it because that week is standardized testing. One experience that we've been having a lot recently at Bloomsbury is sort of looking at when middle grade and picture book authors tour, because we've sort of edged into late April, early May, and, that has become more and more problematic because schools are out or they're testing. And so that's actually caused us to look at pub dates of books differently. Because if a tour with school visits is really important to our campaign for the author, we've gone back to the editorial team and said, if you publish it May 15th, we will not get into schools. And, if it's got to be May 15th for some other reason, then it's got to be May 15th. But it's actually been very helpful for us to say, we reached out to 20 booksellers for this tour and only 3 of them could really provide schools. So it actually can help affect change and make things more productive for everybody.
We had one other note here, which is not on the slide, which is, I know for a lot of you and definitely for us, there are a lot of events that don't come from publishers. We don't have a lot of time to get into that. But the one thing that I would note is that when you are talking to authors directly, you are dealing with a completely different animal than when you're talking to a publisher. It's a lot more personal, for one thing, and usually the local ties are a lot more obvious and deeper. So just as a general rule, I would proceed with a lot more empathy when you're dealing with local authors who are contacting you directly, because they probably feel incredibly personally about your store, and you can't say yes to all of them, and you should not say yes to all of them, but you do need to treat them like the people who walk into your store every day, because that's who they are.
I'll do a quick note. So we've had so many self-published authors come into the store. God, sometimes it's almost like one a day, it seems like, wanting events. And we felt so bad, and we felt we really needed to do something for them. So what we've started to do is once every 2 months on a Sunday, which tends to be one of our slower days, we just pick a handful of them, and we've slotted them in at different times and allowed them to come with their books. They pretty much do all the promotion themselves. We do like 4 or 5 different time slots, and they just come and do a quick little author signing, and they're very grateful and thankful. And we sometimes get a lot of customers we might not have gotten, and it's been working out really nicely, actually, and it makes us feel a little bit better about ourselves that we don't have to say no all the time. And we do have criteria. I mean, there's definitely like, your book has to have a spine. It can't be stapled. I mean, there's certain things that we do, but it's worked well. So it's just a thought.
If you go on the Parnassus Books website and go to parnassusbooks.net/forms, you can see our author event request form, which is something that we've refined over the course of 7 years. Publicists don't use that form. Publicists know that they don't need to use that form. And so the person who calls the store and says, I've just published my book with Ingram Spark and I'd like to have a book signing, gets referred to that form. We also regularly do Google searches and take a look at other bookstores' online forms for similar things and steal ideas and things like that. So that's the first way that we sort of begin to screen, and that form asks things like, beyond the scope of social media, how do you plan to promote your event? Which, your answer to that begins to give the events team an idea of would you be able to effectively promote your event? But we also, and I'm happy to email this to anyone who wants it, we have found over the last 3 years that a little bit of hand holding for the authors who we do end up putting their events on the calendar has resulted in some really huge, the kinds of events that bring people into the store who've never been to the store, huge sales, mom and dad show up and buy 10 copies each because they want the author to sign them and ship them to all the relatives. Those kinds of events with the right ingredients and the right guidance can be really, really rewarding for the author and the store. So, yeah.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Any communication with them when they book an event that says you cannot post on social media and try to sell your book through Amazon?
So
a certain amount of time. I have authors that will book an event, and then the whole week before the event, they're like, "Oh, we're on book club, and now you can get it for 99 cents on Amazon."
So after a question is posed, one of us will repeat the question because we're recording and stuff like that. So the question is, when you book an event with a self-published author, does your store have guidelines about how that author promotes the availability of their book, in particular on Amazon, primarily before the event? So we have a 1-page event tips sheet, and that's what I'll email to you. And one of the things that it says is that our store will not repost anything that mentions Amazon. The author is, of course, if you want to tweet, buy my book on Amazon, that's fine. We impress in all of our communication with self-published authors that people buying the book from our store is just as important an element of the success of their event as them getting people to show up. The point of an event is not just people in the store, it's also people in the store buying your book from this bookstore. And then we just tell them we won't retweet or re-Instagram or anything that mentions Amazon. So make separate tweets.
And I wanted to add too that even though that's probably more likely to be an issue with self-published authors, despite our absolute best efforts, sometimes it is an issue with traditionally published authors as well. So don't be afraid to reach out. I just had a bookseller who I know well reach out to me because she saw an author who she has supported in the past and who she probably will be supporting for his next book. He actually posted a link to Amazon Canada, which was especially unfortunate. But he tweeted something and it got a lot of traction, and he said, you can pre-order my book, and he linked to Amazon. And so it's always a good reminder. We can't see every single social media post that all of our authors do. If you're hosting one of our authors and you see them link only to Amazon, let us know. We'll address it with them. We want to address it with them, and we tell all of them to be careful to link to all retailers. But they forget, and, sometimes it just needs an extra hammering home with them. Okay. So to move on a little bit, so Alex touched on this a little bit by talking about the sort of 3 key pillars of what makes an event successful: the publisher outreach, store outreach, and author outreach. So we wanted to talk a little bit about marketing assets and what kinds of things you can ask the publisher for. This is an example of an author of Bloomsbury's who's actually on tour right now. Her book came out yesterday. So we have found that we really, really like to promote the events because one thing that publishers love is the opportunity to say, buy this book without actually saying, buy this book. So promoting the tour is a great way to do that. Are there any assets or things that you guys have found to be especially helpful or things to keep in mind when talking to publishers about assets?
Yes. Sorry. Yes. So, well, in particular, so so much stuff today is driven by social media. It is really important to get all of the authors like handles, their specific tags for their Twitter or their Instagram or their Facebook, as well as not only theirs, but if they have the publishers and the imprint at the publishers and as many people as you can sort of tag and put into your posts, it will go into a much larger place. And the authors will not know unless you tag them. Usually they're not following every single bookstore. We wish they were, but they're not. So it's very important to get that information because sometimes if you just, say Google John Green, you're going to come up with 1,000 fan counts and never going to find the right one. So that's my tip.
Two things that we do with regard to marketing assets. It's always helpful to us to ask the publicist to talk to the author about which social media channels they feel are most effective for reaching their fans. Some people have huge Twitter followings, but actually their Instagram audience is more engaged. So it never hurts to ask the publicist that. And then we found it to be particularly effective, especially if an event promotion is not going as well as you would hope, to have a Facebook event for the event, because if you're communicating with the publisher about how the promotions are going, they can go in and boost your event with geo-targeted Facebook ads. Should we mention the tour reveal thing?
Sure.
Yeah. So another question that we always ask up front, once we've confirmed an event, is, will there be a tour reveal? Mm-hmm. Can you tell me when it will be? Or can you give me 48 hours notice? And then would you prefer that we wait to promote until the reveal? Because, if John Green is announcing his tour, you don't want to scoop him and get in trouble.
And a link. You always want to ask to get a link for the tour reveal page so that you can link to that.
And also, we'll get to this, I think, but when you're talking about tour reveals, especially if you have ticketed events, which we'll, again, talk more about, you need time to sell tickets. So, sometimes you book an event 6 months in advance and the tour reveal doesn't happen until 2 months before the event. The sooner you can get tickets out, the better. So be clear about the way that your market sells tickets, because there are stores where 2/3 of the tickets sell in the last 2 weeks. Our store, you start seeing whether an event is going to be successful within a week or two of tickets going up, no matter when they are. That publishers don't, so be upfront about your needs in order to fill the seats.
And so just to go back to some of the other things you might need. So this is sort of a quickie checklist of things to ask about, various things that the author might need. So what have you guys found to be some of the most surprising things that people have come to you and at the last minute and said that they needed?
Coconut water. We had somebody who needed coconut water and I was like, okay, and it had to be boxed coconut water, not like I don't even know how else it comes, but so I went and I found them and I bought like 12 things of coconut water and they didn't drink any. And then I found out coconut water is not so good.
I will say that the number of food items that I've purchased for authors because they're specifically mentioned in writers and then the author shows up and has no idea that this has been requested on their behalf is pretty stunning. I had to get a steak at 11 in the morning on a Saturday once, which is harder than you think because it had to, anyway.
Handles of whiskey, but not usually for children's authors.
Yeah. I always like to ask if there's a particular kind of writing implement that an author likes to sign with. Especially for YA events, I try to remember to ask if the book has a dark title page and will they need a metallic Sharpie or do they travel with a pen that they like to sign on that dark page because a black Sharpie won't show up. And for picture book authors, especially if they've illustrated the book themselves or if they're traveling with the illustrator, asking if they need something like an easel or any like drawing or art supplies. Often illustrators like to do like a drawing demonstration. And we have an easel and a large online drawing pad at the bookstore just for that occasion.
Yeah. So, going back to a few more questions to ask yourself. This ties into authors publicizing the events as well, because I know from my end, we found that the clearer that we and the author are about what any rules of the event might be, the better it is for everyone in the long run. Have you guys found that as well?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So in a perfect world, it would be great if the publisher would basically say all the bookstores have to follow the same rules. It would make things, I think, a lot easier, but I understand that they can't do that. But it's hard sometimes, especially with the big tours, when you have a set of rules that's very different from another bookstore's set of rules. For instance, we say only books purchased in our store can be signed, because we don't want everybody buying it cheaper someplace else and then just using our store for the signing.
Heather, does that include backlist?
We allow people to bring one book from home. That's what we do. We had to sort of put that in place because we had an author once that had a enormous backlist, and it was a young adult author with a huge cult following, and people showed up, I kid you not, with suitcases of books, and it ended up being a 5-hour signing.
Yep.
It was insane. And they only bought one kids book from us to get in the line to have their suitcases of books signed. So we sort of put the kibosh on that. We say one book from home. Anything else they buy in the store can be signed. So that is our policy. What do you guys
Ours
do?
is a little more easygoing. For unticketed events, we don't really have, like, a few times we've required that a book be purchased at the store, because that's what the publisher has asked for. For ticketed events, usually they've bought a book with their ticket, so that makes it easy. As far as backlist signing, most events where we have people with a lot of backlist are also events where we sell a lot of backlist, even if the people who are coming own many of the books already. So we find that those sales are pretty good anyway. So our limits in that case usually come from the author or the publisher. And we sometimes adjust them on the very day because sometimes those rules change as the signing proceeds.
There are things that we ask up front. So we ask, is there an overall limit per person to the number of books that the author will sign? Of course, like we ask up front, are there limits on backlist? Do you want a purchase requirement? We also ask how many books will the author personalize? Are there any guidelines that you want for personalization? Sometimes the author will personalize the front list and autograph everything else. We ask about photography guidelines. Will the author pose for photos? Would they prefer only candid photos? Would the publisher like us to have a dedicated person to take phones and take pictures? That is the single thing that will make incorporating photography into a book signing line go faster. And so often we offer that without being prompted, but I usually ask. At Parnassus, for events that I'm running pretty much, we have you have to buy the front list book from us in order to bring books from home to be signed, unless once or twice I've actually been disallowed from doing that by the publicist. And with our audience, that decreases the proportion of sales to attendance. We have a lot more people who just will not buy the book from us unless you make them. And we enforce that by saying that the event is free, but you need a signing ticket to join the signing line. That way we're not checking receipts. We're asking to see your signing line ticket. And for larger signings, we put letters on those tickets, and organize the signing line into signing groups. And it just helps, if you have 150 people in your bookstore, and you tell them it's just like when you get on a Southwest plane, then if they're in group D and the author is signing and spending 5 minutes with every person in line, then people know that they can go next door and get some Chipotle and come back. So all of those things are things that we've done over time. And it's just important to communicate as much as you can in advance so that people know what to expect. And then to go over it again repeatedly over the course of the event, because you cannot trust that people will show up and have read your website or have read the email that you sent them or anything like that.
And that's some good language that you can use, that the event is free, but in order to enter the signing line, you must purchase the new book from our store. It tends to work really well. It also enables you to advertise at places that will only allow you to advertise if an event is free. So using that language works for many reasons.
And when you are explaining the fact that that is the rule at the event, it gives you an opportunity to say, by purchasing a book from our store, you're demonstrating to publishers that Nashville is a market that supports authors, and you're sending a signal to them to keep sending your favorite authors to Nashville. The best way to support both the author and the bookstore for hosting the event is to purchase their new book at the bookstore, is a thing that I say pretty frequently. So it provides you a little window for some advocacy.
Yeah, even with our more chill policies, which maybe will change now. We do always, in every size of event, make a pretty direct note that the only reason that we have events and the only reason that we're here to be a beautiful, vibrant part of our community is because people buy things from us, because we are businesses, and it's okay to be upfront about that with people who are coming to your events. If you are running good events and you are providing a service to the community, then most people won't take offense at hearing that it's good to buy things from a store. So it's worth saying.
Someone in the back had a question.
So the question was, for especially children's authors who've published books with multiple publishers, how do you handle backlist at events? Is that a good summary? So I hosted Mac Barnett in March. We did 2 school visits and an in-store, and both of the librarians that I sent him to specifically asked if we could include books by a different publisher on his order form. And I texted a friend at another bookstore for some advice, and then I emailed the publicist and said, both of the librarians that are hosting him have asked for this other book series on his form. Of course, it's important to me that your publisher's sales are strong. Do you have any strong feelings about this? And does Mac? And she wrote back and said, we'd really prefer to keep the focus especially at the school visits, on our titles. But you're welcome to have anything you like in the store for his public event. And I ended up, so we do both a pre-order form and a post-order form, and let's not get too bogged down in the details of school visits, but I kept it off of the pre-order form, and I included the first book in the series on the post-visit order form. The pre-order forms, those books can be personalized, and so we do tend to just generally see more pre-orders than post-visit orders. And the post-visit orders are just autographs, so they're a little bit less desirable. And then I had his Harper titles, I had his Abrams titles, I had just about everything at his in-store event. But, the books that he was on tour for are front and center in higher quantity. They're the ones that we're including the book covers for in our marketing materials, all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. And I think that that's really important. It's kind of like saying, you have to buy the book in our store to support us. We have to sell the publisher's book when the publisher is funding the tour. And it seems like a pretty basic thing, but a lot of times people get a little irked about that, and they want to, but the truth is they're paying for the tour. So sell their book. Obviously, if it's in your store, you're not going to hide books that the author wrote, but you can keep them up there, but you can still keep the publisher who's sending the author on tour front and center. I think that's important.
Yeah, and I think also it sometimes just depends on the author too. There are some authors who will specifically ask us, can we can we have copies of my other books with other publishers there? And I think it kind of depends on a case by case basis. But yeah, I think approaching the publisher and saying, you know, we have a request and letting them make the decision.
Oh, and relatedly, sometimes authors publish only with one publisher, and the backlist might be more designed. I think picture book event, especially if you have hardcover front list and a ton of popular paperback backlist, then the tendency will be that you will sell a lot of the backlist, but you still want to super emphasize the front list because like that book is the one that's being budgeted for, and that book is the one that they're touring for.
And I think a sort of exception to that sometimes is when an author is touring for a series. If the first one is in paperback and they're touring for the fourth and that's in hardback, I think the publisher kind of gets there's going to be a lot of number one sold because you can't really start with 4. Yeah. So.
Yeah. And oftentimes, like, even though we're touring them for book 4, we're still trying to keep building the series. And, you know, and also, of course, like, you know, not to get too into the New York Times bestseller list, but a lot of times we're touring people with the hopes that they might hit the bestseller list. And so, especially if it's more, the third or later book in the series, it all counts for the bestseller list. So we're happy to have any series sales.
But that, you know, just ask. Like, it's all about communication.
Yeah. So we already talked a little bit about author events. So now we'd love it if you guys would go back to your initial event idea that you wrote down and take a few minutes and kind of look at it again and see if there's anything that the discussion has inspired you to add or change about it. And so we'll take a couple of minutes for that, and then we'll open it up to questions. Okay, so if everyone's ready, we'd love to take questions about in-store events, about anything we've talked about already, or any other component of in-store events that you guys have questions about. Right there.
So the question is, first, how do you handle potential hardcover sales and ordering of backlist in a series if the earlier books in the series are also available in paperback? And 2, how do you handle a publisher who wants you to order way more books than you think you're going to sell? Accurate? Cool.
I can take part 1.
Cool.
I think the main thing is to know the audience of that particular book, and especially that particular age bracket, because I think the situation that you're describing is mostly going to apply to YA. And I think with YA, if we're able to bring in backlist, which we usually are, we'll bring in a fair amount of the paperbacks in the series and we'll sell them pretty well. But we almost always bring in like a handful, maybe 1 to 3 of each of the hardcovers, and we almost always sell all of them. And that's just a little extra money in your pocket, because there will, for most YA, especially YA events for authors that have big followings and big series, most of those fans are really devout and they want to collect, and what they want is signed, fresh hardcovers that don't look like the ones that they've worn to bits. So you will sell those books, and I would just be cautious about how many you bring in. I'm
going to sound like a broken record, but ask the publicist, especially, you know, if it's a series, they've been on tour before. How are their hardcover sales on previous tours? We had an author in March, and the publicist, I actually didn't have to ask. They were like, by the way, we had him on the second leg of a tour, which was also really helpful because they had very recent data. They were like, the stores that ordered the hardcovers for his tour of his backlist all sold out. And I ordered twice as much hardcover as I had been already thinking I might. And we sold out of every title except book 3. So yeah.
Also, time of year sometimes makes a difference. If it's the holiday season, there'll be people more likely to buy the hardcovers as gifts, so you might want to add an extra 2 or 3. To answer part 2 of the question, when a publisher is asking you to bring in more books than you're comfortable with, what I always say is, this is how many I'm comfortable with. If you want me to bring in more, that's fine, but you have to send call tags to pick up what doesn't sell. And that's just the deal breaker. If they're not, and they've never said no. So just make sure that you get the okay that they will send call tags, and then fine, let them send whatever they want. Yeah. So just make sure they'll do that.
And yeah, just to add, when there's often someone at the publisher, especially with some of the bigger YA authors, who is obsessively monitoring that fandom. So they often have like a really good assessment of how many people are collecting hardcovers. Even if there's like a certain book in the series that maybe isn't book one or the most recent book that's like the favorite book. So maybe you should have more of that one. So don't be afraid to pick their brains about that. In the back. So the question is, we've talked about working with publishers and publicists, but what about working with a booking agency?
I've only ever worked with one. Have you?
I've worked with a number of, I assume you mean sort of like third-party publicists hired by the author, right? I ask them all the same questions that I ask a publicist. It's their job to be able to get me those answers.
Yeah. I think you have to treat it the same way that you treat working with the publisher directly.
Understanding that, like, sometimes they may have to, it may take them a little longer to get you an answer because the answer is going through more people on its way to you. But yeah.
In the back there. So the question is, when there's an event coordinator who is outside the publisher and you're working with them, how do you navigate that when it seems like perhaps the communication between that person and the publisher is not as good as you would like it to be? And I know from our end, sometimes there's sort of two different options when there's an outside events person. Sometimes it's someone that we as the publisher have hired just because we're short-staffed at the moment or whatever, or the events are so huge that we need someone outside to help us with them. And in those cases, usually I would imagine the communication is pretty good. And then there's times where we have, for whatever reason, decided not to tour an author, and they would like to do a tour themselves. And so they've worked with someone outside. I would say and you guys can correct me if you disagree, but I would say the onus is not on you to make contact with the publisher. The onus is on the event coordinator if they're working with the publisher or the author themselves. It's that sort of communication, I would say, is not your responsibility. Really, if the author, we always tell our authors, if you're going to set up an event that we haven't set up for you, because sometimes we do a full tour for somebody and they just want to keep doing more events. We always tell them to let us know as soon as possible. We even request sometimes that, like, even if they're going to pay for their own travel, that they still go through us to set up the event so that we can make sure that the store has books. We kind of tell them, if you set it up yourself and you don't tell us, you may not have books, and that's a risk you're taking. And so we try to do that education up front, but sometimes authors go rogue. But I would say it's definitely not your responsibility.
So I would just say also, this happens a lot also with your local authors. We have local authors out the wazoo in the Philadelphia area, and they'll come in and just want to set something up because they're right there. And I always say, let me know the name of your publicist so I can just CC them and keep them in the loop. And all you have to do is do that once. And the same thing if you're working with an outside booking agent, you can just say, who is the author's, publishing publicist, so I can just CC them and keep them in the loop. It just makes things easier when you have to get books or if you have to get anything else. So it's a good thing to do.
Right there.
Oh, what's a call tag?
So a call tag is basically, if for some reason you have books that don't sell and you and the publisher can agree that the reason for that is not really the store, publishers will send you a shipping tag that will allow you to send the books back to the publisher without charging the store.
Okay, so otherwise they're returnable for an offer event that I would ship.
Correct.
Okay, and then with backlist, that would still be returnable for an offer event.
It depends on how you order it.
Yes. Almost everything is always returnable for an author event. It's just if the publisher is pushing you to order more of frontlist or backlist than you're comfortable, you can say to them, yes, but you have to pay for it. So send us a call tag.
So for ordering backlist, when you can return it changes based on how you order it. So if you're ordering it as part of an event order, those books can go back with your event order, like right away. If you're ordering it just as part of your distributor order, or not as an event order, then it has to wait the normal period of time before it can be returned.
Right there. So the question is, and I'm going to generalize it a little bit, but what if you have a store in a small town that's not in the big city or sort of just outside the big city, and you do amazing events, and you often have authors come to your store and get 30 to 40 people, whereas they got 10 at the event in the nearest big city. And how do you communicate to publishers that you are a viable event source? Did I summarize that? So I think one thing is if you have a publisher rep, which not everybody does, but if you do have a publisher rep, that's where the communication should start, because they can go back and say to the publicity team, the marketing team, this is a viable event store. This is really going to be a place where your author can get a lot of value for their event. The other thing I think is that at events like this, when you talk to publishers, whether it's like socializing or whether it's at like the mix and mingle or any kind of speed dating, don't be afraid to say like, this is my store. We do amazing events. Here's my card, and build that relationship and reach out. And if there's an author that is from that publisher, and that there's a book coming in advance, 6 months or 8 months in advance, don't be afraid to reach out and say, we've recently done this event, and this event. Here are the numbers we got. Here are the sales we had. I'm really looking to build my relationship with you. And I think it can be hard because I think sometimes, the publisher is limiting themselves to big cities, or the author wants to only go to big cities. That can also be an issue. But I think, in some ways, all it will take is to build that relationship and get one event and have that publicist see how viable it is. So just to repeat that for the recording, that suggestion is if you're a small store or even if you're a big store, a good strategy is to become a New York Times reporting store. And that's something that you can put in the event grids when you're requesting events and when you're talking to publishers. And that absolutely does matter from a publisher perspective. I like, to be perfectly honest, I don't think we'd send someone at the week of on sale to a non-New York Times reporting store unless, it depends if we have no hope of hitting the bestseller list and we just are looking to get that author out and build them, then we might. But if it's a book where we think we have a good shot, we're going to go to New York Times reporting stores. And that's something that my boss would always ask all of our publicists, these are all New York Times reporting stores, right? Right. So it's definitely a great strategy.
I would say go to the session on event grids because maybe it's your pitch. Over communicate with the publicist after you have a great event. Like send pictures, send a funny anecdote, include all your sales figures and attendance, and use your store's social media platform to make your events prominent. So like take pictures during the event and post pictures during the event and tag the author and tag the publicist. Like be an obnoxious cheerleader on the internet for the amazing events that your store is having and put them in front of as many faces in New York as you can. And like, on Throwback Thursday, like, can't believe we had 50 people for John Smith. So great. Tag Bloomsbury.
And it does matter too, like that sense of like communicating with the author on social media, because the best possible thing is if the author who had that successful event goes back to their publicist and says, of all the stores on my tour, it was in a small town, but I really felt like store A just did the best job and I had the best time and it was really just the greatest. And, I'd love to go back there someday, because not only will they then keep you in mind for that author, but then the next time they're planning a tour, they'll say, oh yeah, like that author had such a great time there. I can send someone there and not worry about them. I know they're going to be taken care of and they're going to have a good time.
Yep.
Right here.
I would like to add.
Yeah, just to repeat that, help the publicists out with geography. Our schools in America aren't always the greatest, so not everybody is very good at their geography. So help them out by saying, we're only 30 minutes from this store. And especially too, if you know of authors who have gone to store in big city and had an event and then gone to your store and had just as big of an event, that's good too, to say, we don't actually compete with them. We have, we draw people from even further west, or whatever that is, so that they can say, oh, I can send them to both places and it won't compete.
Right.
Let's do one more from someone we haven't heard from yet. So right there.
Not necessarily up front. I mean, like just one email that you CC the publicist on that's like, "Dear Sarah, so happy to confirm your event on blah, 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 blah." But then after the event, 100% you should be emailing Erica and saying, "Erica, we had such a great event with Sarah Smith last night. There were 50 people and we sold 500 books and a unicorn came." Absolutely.
And that
just to repeat what the question was. That was if you primarily book events later than the main tour and you're working directly with the author, should you be in contact with the publicist before and after? And the answer is yes, if you can be. They like to know.
Yeah, and I think it also helps you build your relationship with them overall. Like then, maybe they add you to the galley list or the manuscript list for the author's next book and, or they send you a similar book in advance. So it just kind of helps them be more aware of you in general.
Yeah.
So I think now we're going to turn to offsite events and there'll be another question section after that. So don't worry if you have more questions.
Oh, should we have a 2-minute stretch?
Oh, yeah, that's a great idea. Why don't we take a short stretch bathroom break? So if everyone wants to come back in 2 minutes. Okay, everybody. If everyone would take their seats again, I think everyone's back.
Not quite.
So we're going to move on to our next section. And we will take another break after this section. So don't worry.
Erica, before we... one thing I wanted to note about in-store events, which I think is a good segue, is that mostly we're talking about sit-down events with an author talk and a signing afterwards. The other major kind of in-store events, which you may or may not have held, is just an in-store signing, which are a really great way to sell a lot of books with very little overhead. We all recommend, if you have anything like the ability to do this, for signing only events, don't rent a venue. Just make a line outside the block and let the police in the neighborhood know that you're going to do it. And I mean, this really works. Like we've had signing lines up to 1,300 people. Yeah. And it's great. Every single person who goes through the line buys a book. They each get 5 to 10 seconds with the person who's signing. And, 5 hours later, you're very tired. So that's just an exception to the other two major formats, and the other kind of in-store event.
And then one other small announcement. Deb, who's here at the front, has the flashing pens for the Bink auction. So see her if you are interested. You can win $250 in cash. Okay, so moving on to offsite events. So with an offsite event, the most important thing, the first thing, is finding a venue. So how do you guys go about finding venues and how do you figure out which is the right venue for which event?
Alex, you should start.
Oh, should I?
Yes.
So I think it's probably a little different for me than it is for some people because since I started in this position, we have added a few new venues, but some of our relationships predate me by decades. So I think the main thing is that it's once again about relationships. Every venue has their set cost, their set rental. You may find that if you work really well with a venue, you bring people in, you sell tickets and you promote with them, and make their name visible. You might find with time that your rental fee goes down. So it's definitely worth being very much on the same page and working really closely and collaboratively with your venues. As far as figuring out how to choose the right venue, I think that's sort of alchemic. I think one thing you can do is talk to publishers about their expectations for what a given author can do. You can look at events that you or other stores have done in the past for sort of a size gauge. I think when you're looking at offsites, I think the smallest offsite venue that we'll do is 100 people, and that's only when our store is booked with something else. Most of our offsite events are 220 people, 450 people, or 1,000 people. And those, I think, are actually pretty good approximate numbers. And most authors that you have that need an offsite space will completely fill or mostly fill those venues and look really good. So I think looking for sizes like that between the 200 and 300, between the 450 and 600 and like the 1,000 seats is a really good thing to have your eye out for. That's my beginning.
Okay, I could just punch me and then I'll stop talking because I could talk for a long time about this. I think one thing you want to do first, the obvious, is if you can find someplace free, that's where you want to go. So that could be a library. It could be a school. A lot of times, the language you need to use is partner with us. Mm-hmm. That works really well. So obviously, like, that should pretty much be your first choice unless for some reason, the publisher is requiring, state of the art something that you can't find at a school or a library. So then you have to go to a venue that you have to pay for, and you really need to think about the cost of that in terms of, and we're going to get into this a little bit more, but in terms of ticketing, and is there going to be, a book buy involved? Is there going to be extra padded money on there? You have to make sure that you divide that among the attendees that you think will be there and the time that it's going to take, to get it all together. Parking is a huge thing to keep in mind. And it's very different when it is an author that attracts a family. And then when it's an author that's going to attract people who are going to drive themselves, the number of parking spots you need. And I know that kind of sounds silly, but you could say, oh, there's only, it's a 500-seat venue, but there's only 250 parking spots. But if it's Jeff Kinney, they can't drive themselves there anyway. So you're okay with that amount of spots. So that's something that you definitely have to consider for venue. Here's something that I never thought we would have to do, but definitely plug into Google Maps how to get to the venue, because we just did an event at a college and we plugged in the address, not realizing it until like that day, and it sent everybody to a different college. So that's a whole other story, but you do want to, get that information and make sure that Google Maps will send them to the right location if it's obviously not your store and someplace they haven't maybe been before. I could keep talking, but do you want to add some and then we'll come back to it?
Oh yeah. I also have more.
Yeah.
Start yourself a database of venues, a Google Sheet or a Google Doc. Update it with the point of contact at the venue, the range of seating. Some venues have flexible seating. We have a venue that can accommodate anywhere from 500 to 1,600. After each event that you have offsite, update it with notes. Like we worked an event at a school and were shocked to discover that they have a theater in a separate building. That separate building does not have an accessible bathroom. That's a really important thing for us to know and to know in the future and to keep in mind in the future. Update it with best to keep side doors closed for easy flow after event. That kind of stuff. Just start yourself a database so that when you are starting to think about what venue will be a good fit, like you don't have to remember it all. Dump it into the document and then it's all there for you. When you are partnering, especially with a school, it's important to be upfront as early as possible that your expectation that part of what partnering means is that they will promote the event to their families. It's not just something that's happening on their campus. Because if you're a little bit concerned with turnout for, a middle grade offsite and you're having it at a school, you've got a built-in potential audience of 500 students if the school is communicating about the event. I'm a real, flow of people in a space is important to me. If I know that I'm looking for a venue where the author is going to pre-sign all their books and I don't have to manage a signing line, that's going to influence what venues I'm thinking about versus if I know that after the event, I'm going to have to manage a signing line with 500 people, and they're each allowed to get 2 backlist books signed, and they are allowed to take pictures, that kind of thing. If it's a venue that I've never worked with before, I usually won't make a decision yes or no without going to see the venue first. Not everyone is that way. One of the other people on my events team is not that way, but I need to see the space and think about how I'm going to move people and books through the space to accomplish what I need to accomplish.
So a couple more things. One is location, which we haven't touched on yet. There may be a perfect, beautiful, pristine place that wants to offer you an amazing rental rate that is exactly the size that you're looking for. But if it's not where your customers go, it can be disastrous. I speak from recent experience. So think really hard about who's coming to your events and who's coming to which of your events, because you may find that there are some events where you check your tickets and you have people coming from out of state, and one of your biggest markets is actually from, 150 miles away. On the other hand, you will have events where almost everyone comes from within a 25-mile radius of your store. And if you think that an event is mostly those nearby people, you should focus on keeping your venue near your community, because that's where you're going to get the people to fill your seats. So location is really key. Oh, it's so key. And another thing to consider when you're thinking about venue is what is going to happen at the event. Sometimes you don't know that for big events until after the planning has already taken place. But you need to know how much time you have, how much space you have, and how much staffing you have, both of your own and from the venue. So we have, for example, a theater across the street from us that's 220 and 440. We do the majority of our offsite events there, and we get 1 hour, and then everybody comes back to the bookstore for the signing. And that's an arrangement that works really well for us because of the proximity. So if it were any further away, we couldn't do it. On the other hand, we have an 1150 seat venue, where we sometimes do signings afterwards, like live signings. That theater will stay open. That staff will help us, and they do a lot of meet and greets. So they do the signing line. Our job is basically to set the books up and hand them to people as they're checked in. And as far as our role in staffing that event, that's all we do. They have the ushers, they have the security, they do the signing line. So it's important to know what the resources of the venue are in terms of people and place and time.
And I think, just to say it one more time, always talk to the publisher about what their expectations and needs might be for a venue. There are things that, you would never think of, like, is there a green room? Is there a bathroom in the green room? Does the author have to walk through the entire theater to get to the bathroom? Do they need a separate entrance? Do they need separate parking? With one author, and Steph knows this event because it was her event. We used to not request a separate entrance or separate parking or anything like that. And a limited number of people got to meet the author at the event. Everyone got a signed book. Some people got to meet them. And 2 people who did not win the raffle to meet the author lingered around for a long time. Steph had to kick them out eventually. And then they went outside and hid in the bushes and waited until the author left, and then popped out of the bushes and said, "We weren't hiding in the bushes waiting to meet you or anything." And the author graciously signed their books and asked them not to post on social media that they had done this. And of course, they posted all over social media that they had done this. So now that author enters through a separate exit and entrance and separate parking space. So, the publisher will have, especially for bigger authors, they've probably done many tours with this person. They know their likes, dislikes. They know issues like that have come up in the past. So they're ready to share it and ready to make it happen.
Yeah, we've had that happen when people did have a separate, when we've kept the author out of sight except for when they were on stage. And that works, because I can think of one specific time where the author left and we still had some rather angry people who were demanding to see them. and who stuck around the entire time we were cleaning up and packing up. So I think, yeah, if they want a separate entrance, make sure that you get it, because sometimes the people who stick around are not as nice as the people who leave when they're supposed to.
And sometimes someone will find the separate entrance and loiter at the separate entrance and wait for them, even though it's in the back of the theater and you would never think that anyone would wait there, but at least you've minimized it from happening.
Two other things, just quickly. Also, if you are renting a space, find out what comes with that rental agreement. Do you have to pay extra for an AV person? Do you have to pay extra for security, extra for custodial staff, all that stuff? You might not be told up front and could be very important to your budget to know. And don't be afraid to look at untraditional spaces. Movie theaters will often rent spaces, community rec centers, even like catering halls, which are often used just on weekends, are always looking to rent their space on an evening during the week. So there are other venues besides more of the traditional places you would think of.
Cafes and restaurants that are only open for breakfast and lunch.
Okay, so now we'd love it if you guys would take some time and make a list of some of your pre-existing community partners if you have them, and then also some of your wish lists for venues, places in your community that you think might work. Okay, so now moving on to some more of the nitty-gritty details of the event. So we have on here a pre-event checklist of some of the things you might think about, and later on we also have an example of a schedule that you can use. But is there anything else that you guys wanted to talk about in terms of logistics or in terms of what you might need day of?
Oh, yeah. Do you want to go?
Sure.
Okay.
You need to know if you're facilitating a signing line or a pre-signing, and then you need to figure out, do you want to pre-sign at your bookstore and then bring signed books to the venue, or can the venue accommodate a signing at the venue? Getting an author through signing books and then packing them back up and then driving them to a venue is not fun. But sometimes, it'll cost you an extra $300 to have the venue for the 2 hours that it would take to do a pre-signing at the venue. So, that's something to think about. Just having a sense of who needs to be, where, doing what, and when at all times. And that can be sometimes really complicated and sometimes really simple. Knowing how complicated an event is going to be up front. Are you just passing out books and then there's a signing afterwards, or does the publisher want you to stuff a bookmark in every book? That kind of thing. You always want to have an scheduled arrival time, day of contact information, all that kind of stuff. You always want to know if the author has green room preferences. All of this is on the slide. Should we talk about security? Yeah. So ask upfront as early as you can if the author or the publisher feels like you need to have security at their event. My understanding is that in New York, it's relatively easy to just ask an off-duty cop to come to your event, and that varies so widely. Nashville is short 150 police officers, and they would laugh at us if we asked for that. So we work with a security company, and it's, we fill out a form on our website and they call us 2 hours later, and they have a minimum number of hours that the officer needs to be there. And the officer likes to do a walkthrough. Sometimes the author will have their own security. Mm-hmm. One question that we always ask, because if we're doing security, we're paying for that company, is, do you have a budget for that? Because sometimes the answer is yes. And you'll never know if you don't ask. And then it can also be helpful to ask, like, are there specific security concerns that the author has? Do they need a separate entrance? One time we got a list of 20 photographs and known aliases, and it was wild. So communication, always ask.
Another thing on the security, if you're doing it at a school, often there is security there. So you might have to pay for them to stay later or after hours, but it's always best to use the security the school has. They know the school the best. The same sometimes for offsite venues, they might have security guards that you can just hire those same people. And it does tend to be less expensive than off-duty police officers, which we've done a bunch of times. Also, it's really important to know where you're going to be if you're selling books or giving them out, that you have enough tables, where they're going to be situated. You really, like what Stephanie was saying about flow, can be really important, especially to get people into the venue quickly. You don't want to have a bottleneck, so you don't necessarily want those tables to be right in front of the door where people are coming in, but if they're not, then you need a staff member to direct people. So all of those kind of things, really laying it out, will make things go much more smoothly when the event actually starts.
So for most of our offsite events, if we have books to hand out, we have them just past the security checkpoint or the ticket checkpoint, because then people have already been narrowed into a line. And as they go past, you're just like, here it is. Here's your book. And oftentimes they don't know they're getting a book for some reason. So they're very excited or confused. So one thing about security is that I think offsites are not the only case where you might need that. So just bear in mind that it is also possible to get security for two other reasons. We've used both private security agency and off-duty cops for in-store events and for signing line events as crowd control. Because if you do have 1,000 people lined up around the block, that's a lot of antsiness, and it's good to have somebody who's just sort of like watching things, making sure everything is all right. I would say another thing is, staffing. I think especially if you're starting out with offsite events with larger numbers of attendees, overstaff until you really know exactly what you need to run a lean team. Because the worst thing is to have your first self-directed 450 person offsite event and probably have needed about 2.5 more people, which is also from personal experience. Overstaff and make sure, as Stephanie said, write down everything that needs to be done, and then make sure that you assign people to do each of those things, and make sure that the time works out, because you might have breaks, you might have people leaving. This is not necessarily like their shift may end in the middle of the event. That happens. And you need to make sure that there's like crossover and flow so that everything is covered all the time that it needs to be covered. So what we do is we write everything down. We also have like a little huddle. And that goes for anything from like a ticketed in-store event, which we have pretty regularly, to our really big events. Everybody who's involved with it sits down and we go through the entire itinerary out loud. And I really recommend that.
A couple more things. If the author is having family or friends, make sure you get their name on a list. You might also want to put reserve signs on some seats for those family members or friends. If you are the one running the event, do not give yourself a job. I know that sounds kind of weird, but don't put yourself someplace that you can't get out of when a crisis happens or whatever it is, because something will happen and you will end up with enough jobs that you do not have to assign yourself as the check-in person or anything like that. Make sure everybody else is taking care of all of those things and you are free to attend to whatever needs to be attended to.
Occasionally it is not possible for us to have a top of event huddle. And so another thing that we have begun doing standard for all of our large in-stores and offsites is we send an email 48 hours before that is broken into pre-event tasks, during event tasks, post-event tasks. And it has like bold, your name, you are doing this here. We include like, do we want you to wear Parnassus shirts? All that kind of stuff. make sure that you have everyone's cell phone number who is working at the event, make sure that they have yours, and make sure that everyone understands that in an emergency, they will be getting a text. And so they should not have their phone on silent so that they don't receive your text that says 911 emergency in the green room, come ASAP. But also so that it, isn't like going off in the middle of the event.
Yeah, actually, I was just going to say it's time to start taking questions about offsite venues. So yeah, go ahead.
Oh, yay.
Great.
That's okay. No, I had a little advice that I've learned over the years doing offsite events is also take into account a loading area or where you'll be unloading your thousands and thousands of books, and whether there's going to be a ramp or an elevator, how many stairs will you have to go through before you get to the area where you're going to be setting up your books. But that's always a very important thing to take into account.
Yeah, I don't think that we talked much about load-in, but probably aside from pre-signing or a full signing, I think aside from a pre-signing as part of your setup, getting your books into place, both for the signing and then into wherever you're going to be handing them out, is the thing that's going to be the most difficult and take the most time. So give yourself as much extra time as possible, both in your own arrival and in making sure that your author is arriving in a timely fashion. So ask exactly how long they need to sign that many books, and then make sure that you have a little time on top of that if you possibly can.
Any questions?
Will you give us these slides? Well done. Thank you. Never mind.
If you email jen@bookweb.org, GEN@bookweb.org, you will get the presentation.
And the presentation's also being videoed.
And the presentation is also being videoed for long distance learning.
You can move back.
Yes, but you won't get it this week. Oh, .org.
I think there was a question over here.
Alex, you were saying overstaff. My store is the owner and 2 staff members. So would you recommend getting volunteers? Have y'all worked with volunteers? How would you go about recruiting that?
So I think I'm going to pass this to them because we actually are really blessed. Like my store, I don't know how many booksellers we have, but our overall staff is about 40 people. So we, at the moment, we don't have enough people, but usually we have enough people that we can cover almost anything. And when we do big in-store stuff, we can basically recruit everybody who's on the floor to do something. But I think they both nodded vigorously, so.
Do you want to go? No, you don't. Okay. So we don't have a giant staff either, but we do have 8 people. And for certain events, we call them AHOD events, like all hands on deck. Everybody has to go. But when we need even more people than that, or if there's a reason some people can't come, sometimes we use, old staff members, staff members who've moved on don't work for us necessarily anymore, but have retained relationships with the store and are always happy to come out and give us a hand. A lot of times, if you have a teen advisory board, a lot of the teens, you can get, we have recruited some of our favorite teachers who thinks that this is the greatest thing ever is to be doing this. And we're like, okay. And a lot of times instead of actually I don't know if I can talk about pricing, but we'll give them a gift certificate as a thank you as opposed to anything like that. So,
and teens are particularly good in the role of photo taking.
Yes. Yes, they are.
Yeah. We have a regular event series that is a community partnership series with 4 other community organizations in town. One of which is the library. And so for those events, those organizations know that they are required as part of the partnership to send at least 1 staff person. And we communicate in advance and they have to tell us who they're sending so that we can send them instructions. And then if we need extra volunteers, often if it's hosted through that partnership, we can ask the library to ask their volunteer bank. Nashville has a very active SCVWI chapter, and we support them and they support us. And so if we need extra hands, I've sent emails to their regional advisor and said, we need bag stuffers or book flappers or whatever. And then also sometimes it's frantic 3 a.m. texts to friends. Can you be at this venue tomorrow from 2 to 4 p.m. to shove books in front of John Green?
Back there.
Our local high school.
Just as another suggestion for volunteers, our local high school has a civics class where the students have to have community service hours. A lot of the parochial schools or private schools in your area may have those similar type requirements, and those are we've gotten some really great kids and new customers out of asking for help.
If your store has sales reps who live in your area, they are often happy to help, and sometimes they have teenage children who can also be conscripted into helping.
Just another note on potential like collaborators and partnerships. So I run a teen book festival in Pittsburgh, and we're under a large arts nonprofit organization. And so a lot of arts nonprofits are very keen to like get speakers in and to bring authors. So you might be able to rent like an expensive theater for not very much money if you tap into your arts nonprofits.
Any other questions? Okay, then I think we can take another quick bathroom break. So see everyone in 5 minutes. Okay, everybody, we're ready to get started again. So we might have a little bit of a demonstration for you guys, but we wanted to see, can we get a show of hands? How many people are experienced with flapping and pushing and pulling books for signings?
Oh, we're fine then.
I think we're. How many would like to see a demonstration of push and? Okay.
Very good. All right. So we'll start with hardcovers. So if you have, if you have a massive number of books to sign in a pre-signing, you're going to want to flap it and then stack it. So we'll start with probably the full title page, but always check with the publicist about which title page they're going to have signed. You flap it. And then, breaking all the rules of how to be super gentle to books.
Oh, you open flap your hardcovers.
Oh, yeah.
Interesting.
Controversy.
So, Parnassus has 2 subscriptions, and the authors usually come to our store to sign, which means that once a month we're getting an author through signing 800 books, and they wouldn't fit on our table if we open flap, so we close flap.
Well, we usually, if we're doing it in store, we usually take up like an entire, we'll have like one table and then take up the floor of the used bookseller. And we usually have like 4 or 5 people helping. But for the actual table, basically the 2 main things that you need are somebody to pass books to the author. Oh, there we go. Pass books to the author, and the other person waits like a panther, and as soon as there's a signature, grabs the book away, and then somebody else can take it from there and get it back in the box. So,
I'm the author?
Yeah, you're the author.
Excellent.
Okay. Or do you want to pull? Sure, I'll pull. Yeah, okay.
We recommend that everybody be standing except the author.
It's a lot easier if there's no cloth on the table.
Yeah. So you've got your book, and you pass. And then you're like, oh no, paperbacks.
Oh, and the spells. No.
And then you're like, haha, sorry about this one. Ah. And then you're like, uh-oh, this one for some reason is different from all the others. Silver Sharpie. There we go. And then, so theoretically, if you have this, you'll probably want a couple more people. One is going to take the stacks of books and move them towards you. The other one is going to take that stack of books and move it towards boxes, so that it can go to its ultimate destination. And when you're stacking books like that, I think you can usually do like 8 to 10 before.
It depends on the height
everything.
of the book and also whether or not the
Depends
book
on the
has
spine.
a slippery, like some books are really slippery,
And so-
others don't slide at all.
And it depends on the spine as well.
Yeah.
But anything taller than that, and then all of them sort of cascade sideways into the author, and
Which has happened.
and it's not good. So just do that, but like 1,500 times.
Yeah.
And oftentimes the author like won't even touch the book with their other hand. Like they'll just sign, and like someone like shoves it right in front of them, holds it open, and then someone else is already reaching to pull it away.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think ideally if you're passing like this, then like literally as soon as the pen lifts from the paper, somebody is snatching that book away from them. And the goal, it's a very delicate game to not try to grab the book before they're done writing their name.
Yes. Yeah.
But it is good if you can have 4 people, 2 on each side. I mean, which kind of seems like silly. It's one author signing a book, but it will go so much quicker if you do that.
And I think people who are signing that many books that quickly, it's very helpful if they have to expend like the absolutely smallest amount of movement and energy, because it's difficult for us to be like hunching over the books and passing them. It's way harder to sign that many books. So
yeah,
the more help you can give them, the better.
There was a hand over there.
Do you suggest the post-its? Oh, I'm sorry.
So in most, the question was about personalization.
Mm-hmm.
In most cases, when you're pre-signing that many books, like for an event, you know, and there are 800 people coming and each ticket included a book, they're not personalizing. We do like a case when you are accommodating personalizations is school visit orders. And yeah, the post-it, on the jacket flap, not on the paper, and never, ever, ever on the title page, always on the opposite side so that the author doesn't have to move the post-it every time they're signing. You can also, that's another thing, you can ask the publicist, if the author is going to be personalizing books in the pre-signing, where would they like the post-it note to go?
I was just going to say the same thing. You'd be surprised at how many preferences authors have if you ask, but just ask.
People are very particular. As far as when to post it and not, if it's an in-store reading, then I usually ask the author whether they would like post-its or not. A lot with smaller audiences don't care and don't want it posted. Often they know many of the people in the audience and it's sort of a moot point. I always assume that anything over 50 people, it's better to post it.
Yeah.
After that point, we do it automatically. It just makes things easier for everybody.
And another quick thing about that, particularly if it's an author that has friends and family at the event and they say to you, oh, I don't need to post it. They know me. They might. Maybe they don't remember the person's name. Maybe they're caught up in the post-it note everything. It's just so much easier and it avoids embarrassment for the author who all of a sudden looks like a deer in headlights because they don't remember the name of this neighbor who was their neighbor like 16 years ago.
Or they don't know how to spell that person's name correctly.
That's how I always phrase it. I say, just so they get your spelling right, let's just write it out for them.
Yep.
And it always works.
Yeah.
Okay, so are we ready to move on to logistics?
Was
there anything else you guys wanted to touch on?
there was one other thing I wanted to talk about that we didn't touch on, which is that my sort of ride or die thing for all events is introductions. I think every store approaches these differently. I feel very strongly that they're one of the most important things you can do in order to create a sense of community with your customers, with the author, and with publishers, because a well thought out introduction completely changes the tenor of your event. It shows that you care about that author. And I mean this even if you haven't read the book, you can still do the research to understand the heart of that book and to understand who the author is. And it doesn't have to be a large amount of research. It just takes some care and attention. And when you can show an author that you have specifically written something for them that's not just a paragraph from Wikipedia or like their Indie Next information, or IndieBound information, and isn't just off the back of the book, that matters. Authors notice, customers notice, because your personality and the store's personality are being injected into the way you're introducing the author. And in that way, you're introducing the store as well. And especially for people who come to a lot of events for a single genre, you become the face of something that they care about. And part of that is because you're using your language and making yourself a person to them. And then when authors hear an introduction they like, they're going to say so. Like, they'll make comments about it. They'll be excited about it. And that's the kind of thing that makes them go back to their publisher and say, hey, this bookstore treated me really well, and I had a good time there, and I cared about my event there. Even if it wasn't super huge, if it's an event that you've put detailed work into, they're going to respond to that positively, and you may see them again, and you may get other authors because publishers are hearing good things about you. So even if it just takes an hour or so, it's worth it if you can do it to make that special and individual, because the effects of it can be really wide-ranging and important.
Thanks. Sorry, this is just one area I struggle with, is the introductions. From a writer perspective, is there a way that you structure what you're going to say to them? Is there any kind of information you definitely should or should not include in that introduction?
So you should definitely include, and I say this even though it's obvious because I've heard intros that don't, you should include the author's name and the name of their new book. I've literally heard people introduce people without using either. And that just shows that you're not really paying attention to what you're talking about. I have a pretty specific way of writing introductions, which is I begin by introducing the store, thanking people for being there, and also reminding them that it is a business and that we love it when they buy books from us. Then if there is a conversation partner or moderator, I introduce that person, usually with a very brief paragraph that lists a couple of the things that they do, and thank them for being there. And then for the author, depending on the book, I will spend more time on either sort of some biographical information or information about the book itself. But I will include both of those, and I usually start with the biographical information and move into the book, because saying, like, this is the book, this is the story that we're getting into, this is the information that we're getting into, and it's great that we get to hear about this, and please join me in welcoming this author. So that's the way I do it. I think there are other ways that you can, but I found it very effective and sort of a good flow of information to move from the general into the specific. And I think when you get to the part about the book, you can get more personal and sort of talk about it emotionally and thematically. And I think that gets people really engaged.
You can also always ask the publicist, are there any accomplishments or titles that it's important to the author that are mentioned in their introduction?
Okay, so let's get into logistics. So we already talked a little bit about staffing, and, you know, what to do on the day of with your staff. Was there anything else you guys wanted to mention before we take a look at an example schedule?
I think we hit everything.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So Steph, do you want to talk about the schedule since it's your schedule?
Sure. I'm happy to email this to anyone separate from the slide so that it's more legible. This is my schedule for John Green. We had this event on a Tuesday, and that weekend was the Southern Festival of Books, at which we are the bookseller. And there was, this will not come as a surprise to anyone that in this room now, but there was constant communication between myself and John's team about what would need to be accomplished. And at 10:30 p.m. on Sunday night, his publicist emailed and said, you need at least 10 more people at the top of the event to accomplish everything that needs to be accomplished at the top of the event. So this event was 1,600 people, a one-to-one bundle, meaning every person had to have a ticket, and every ticket included a copy of the book. When you arrived for the event, you were going to be handed a tote bag, inside of which was going to be an autographed copy, pre-signed, of his new book, a program, and a poster. And those three items, the tote, the poster, and the program, arrived separately. So we also had to stuff tote bags, 1,600 tote bags, with a poster and a program at the venue, because there's not even room in the bookstore to open boxes of containing 1,600 tote bags. Then we had to get John through signing them, stuff them all, bring them to the place where the people would come in. There was stuff that needed to be set up, like they had life-size cutouts of John and Hank and a photo, what are they called?
Like a photo backdrop?
Yeah, but there's a word for them.
Step and repeat.
Yeah, a step and repeat that had to be set up in the courtyard outside the theater by a certain time that wouldn't be arriving until the tour bus arrived at the venue. John had to sign all the books. Then there needed to be time for John and Hank and their team to eat pizza, which had to be obtained, because pizza, I guess they're not fans of cold pizza. And then, the event had AV that had to be timed specifically, and also we had to build in time for a mic check and a sound check. That's not super common. I've only had to do a sound check, mic check with the author, I think 3 times. Usually they just want to know that you've tested the AV. They don't actually want to do a sound check, but like Hank plays the guitar. So like he wants to do all the things that people who play guitars do. And then we had to get 1,600 people checked in by the venue. They had to pick up their totes. They had to have an opportunity to submit questions for John and Hank, which were on pieces of paper and like screened. And then they also had to have time for like book sales and taking a picture with the life-size cutouts. So that's my schedule. I think I had at least 20 people. Some of those people are like, I texted some of the volunteers who do story time for us because on 36 hours notice, I had to get an extra 10 people. And it's the most complicated event I've ever done. And it went off almost without a hitch. And because especially we were so well staffed for the tote stuffing pre-signing setup part, we got him through 2,200 books in 54 minutes, which he says is a record. Now, maybe he was just being nice, but yeah.
Sounds true.
So we've talked a lot about how to make it a successful event for the author, how to make it a successful event for you as the store, how to make it a successful event for the publisher. So what are some of the things in terms of communication with the attendees that help make it successful for them as well?
I think being very clear about people do actually like rules. They may not always be happy about the individual rules you give them, but they like knowing what's going on. So initial information when they buy their tickets is important. Very often when you're doing ticketed events, especially larger events, you don't have all the information. You don't necessarily know right away what the signing guidelines are going to be, especially signing guidelines and photo guidelines. Those often come later. So we usually send an event email like 48 hours in advance that gives specific information about signing and photo ops, parking. It reminds people to let us know if they need some kind of accommodation. It's sort of the last chance we have to definitely deal with that. And also what? Mostly those things. And then the other, I think, important factor is to keep giving people information. So if we have a complicated transition between the reading and the signing, for example, we'll have signage up, we'll have people at the doorways, it will be in the introduction, and we will have people to lead them exactly where they need to go for the next stage of the event. So I think just constant reminders and giving people information in more than one form is important, because not only is the repeat important, but different people absorb things differently. And the more ways that you can let them know what's going on, the happier and more informed they'll be.
Sort of piggybacking on that information also sort of has to be constantly given to your staff as well. So every time you get an update, don't assume just because you got the update that everybody in your staff knows that. I've done that one too many times, and I've been like, no, that's not it anymore. We've changed. So make sure your staff knows. The other thing is, a lot of times you need to manage the line, and particularly since we're talking about children's events, there are long lines. Kids have to wait in long lines. I find it really important, instead of having sort of staff that manage the lines. We call them staff chatters. They're line chatters. So we just make sure that we go up and down sort of the line and we talk to the kids, not to the parent. And you guys all, children's books are your life. So you all know that you can just look at a kid. You can see a kid with a Fortnite shirt on. You can be like, hey, did you get the new update? Or somebody has a Harry Potter hat and be like, hey, what, house are you in? Or anything to sort of keep the kids engaged. It also is helpful to the parents because the child has probably been asking the parent every 5 seconds, are we almost at the front of the line? Are we almost at the front of the line? You can also tell people, hey, you're getting closer. There's only 4 more people in front of you. Or, why do you love this book so much? But keeping the kids engaged and happy keeps the parents happy, and we all want happy customers.
Mm-hmm. Dismissing people at the top of the signing who are not staying for the signing first is because then you're not looking at an auditorium of 500 people and thinking, how am I going to get 500 people through the line? You're looking at an auditorium of 200 people who actually want to stay for the signing. Having a plan and communicating in advance. If you have purchased a ticket and you are no longer able to attend, here is how you can get a refund before the event. And also, if you purchased a ticket and you are not able to attend and your ticket included a book, here is what you do to get your book, and here is how long the bookstore will hold your book. Until we figured this out, and it took us a surprisingly long time to figure out that we needed to figure it out. We had a section in the back of the store called Book Purgatory that was these pre-signed books from events that were 3 years old and they were paid for, and we didn't feel like we could sell them because someone had paid for them and we had left them 3 voicemails and sent them 2 emails and they just hadn't. So whatever that plan is for us, it's you have 30 days to contact us and either pay for shipping or make an arrangement to pick up your book in the store. Everyone does it differently, but communicating that up front, we now put it like in the event description before you buy your ticket.
Yeah, we do something very similar, including the time frame. We don't, however, do ticket refunds.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, there are a few exceptions, like if somebody cries a lot. But by and large, we don't refund tickets.
Interesting.
It's basically like you wouldn't be able to get a refund for most other forms of like cultural entertainment. We're a business. This is a ticket. It's not different.
Yeah.
But you can still get your book.
Yeah.
And I think also what Stephanie's sort of saying, just the more information, and this would go probably into the introduction, that you can tell the attendees, like afterwards, this is how it's going to happen. Mm-hmm. Tell them before, during the introduction. Also tell them after the author's left the stage. Give them those instructions. Again, everybody, as much as you said, like people might not necessarily like the rules, they want to know the rules. They want to know how it's going to work.
We also, especially for kids events, especially for big events, and especially for events where we know the author, where it's going to be a late night, we will often say something like, signing guidelines help ensure that everyone, including the author, has a respectful and enjoyable experience and that everyone is able to get their book signed in the amount of time that we have. So bringing people on board and letting them know that like the guidelines are for everyone and including the author, has helped.
So was there anything else in terms of managing the turnout or managing your interactions with individual customers that you guys wanted to address?
Oh, yes. Well, I think this probably sounds pretty simple, but I think it's very easy to get overwhelmed by logistics and keeping things smooth on a larger scale when you're doing things like this. And it's important to remember that each person who's there is there as an individual customer. And so they expect the same level of customer service that they would get from you on a slow day. And you can't necessarily talk to them as long, but you can talk to them as patiently and respectfully. And I think that can be really difficult when you're in the thick of things. But just remember that I think my philosophy when it comes to events is that at the end of the day, the only person who can still be stressed out is you. Which I think ideally nobody is, but you want the publicist to leave happy, you want the author to leave happy, and you want all of your customers to leave happy. And ideally the rest of your team also to leave happy. So, I mean, it doesn't sound great, but like if there's anything going wrong, it has to land on you, and everyone else has to see this as a wonderful, pleasant time, because that is really the goal of what you're doing.
If you have enough staff, it's a good idea with some of the big events to have a person who is a problem handler, so that when the person can't find their ticket, their name isn't on the list, they're not holding up the line, they can go to the problem handler. Or if there's something, all of a sudden they didn't say, oh, their child needs to be sit this way or that way, you can send them to the problem handler. They don't call them the problem handler. But if you have enough staff, we found that has rescued us out of a lot of situations.
Okay, so let's talk about ticketing. So how do you guys make the decision whether to do tickets? How do you manage it? What do you do if an event is not selling tickets very well?
You start. I'm like the bad guy. You want me to start?
Yeah.
Okay. So basically, ticketing, if you can use a ticketing agency like Brown Paper Tickets or Eventbrite, that is your best bet in terms of ticketing. They take all of sort of that responsibility off of you. They're very easy to use. You can put all of your information in there. You can send reminder emails through that. We use Brown Paper Tickets, so I'm not as sure with Eventbrite, but Brown Paper Tickets doesn't cost anything to use. They do tack on a little, and it's really nominal.
Yeah, Eventbrite is the same.
Eventbrite fee to the ticket, but anybody purchasing a ticket online these days expects the service charge fee, so no one is. The important thing with ticketing is that you get the information from the publisher of how the ticket works. Is the ticket, like Stephanie's saying, a one-on-one? The ticket is the copy of the book, and every single person who enters the auditorium has to purchase the copy of the book. Or does the ticket include a copy of the book and admission for a family of 4? Or is the ticket just a nominal fee and the option to buy the book is left to you when you get there? So all of those things have to be considered, and you have to find out what the publisher wants and also what's going to, work best for the venue that you've purchased, rented. Because sometimes, all right, so I'll be honest, I have a little bit of an issue with all this because I don't think we charge enough when we have these events. I don't think we ever realize that we need to make money, and not just money so we can break even, but in order to be able to keep existing as a store and keep existing and do what we do, you need to make money. And the only way to do that sometimes is to tack on an additional fee, or to say we can't let a family of 5 in for the price of one book to which you're getting a 46% discount. It doesn't work that way. So we undervalue ourselves a lot in this industry, and I think this is one of the places where we do it the most. We're providing not just an event, we are bringing a community together. We are there, our staff is there, we are excited, we are able to expose these kids, to things that they wouldn't normally see. You would never consider going to the movies with your family and saying to them when you get there, it's really just a movie my kids want to see, so I don't want to pay to go in, but I'm going to go sit with them. That wouldn't happen. But somehow that's acceptable here. And I don't understand that. So that's why I said I'm kind of like the bad guy in the room here, because I don't think the price of the book is necessarily enough. If you have to pay $200, $400, $800, $1,000 for a venue, if you have to have an extra 10 people staffing that, if you have to pay for a tech person, if you have to build in time to close your store early so you get there, none of that is going to, you are not going to make money on a $16.99 book and that takes up 5 seats. It's just not going to happen. So that is my little rant. I will leave it there and let everybody else take over.
So, figuring out, I call it the ratio. Figuring out your ratio is critical. And again, you should be asking the publicist, can we do a 1-to-1 bundle? For a picture book event, it's possible that ratio could hurt your attendance. We typically do 1-to-2 or 1-to-4 for a picture book, because a parent and a child coming together are less likely to want to have to essentially purchase 2 books. You should also be building your budget up front so that if you need to add $5 to the cost of every ticket so that your ticket for a $16.99 book is actually $21.99, you can do that ahead of time. An event type that I would encourage everyone to ticket is celebrity events, whether that's a celebrity who's written a picture book or like, for example, Doug the Pug, who is an Instagram famous dog, lives in Nashville, and has published a surprising number of books for not having thumbs. And when you meet Doug the Pug, you are coming into our bookstore, you are standing behind Doug, and Doug's team is taking your picture, and then a bookseller is stamping your book with a rubber stamp that is Doug's paw. That is your entire experience. So if you want to come and do that, you can pay $15 for a ticket that includes a book.
You know, Crusoe, the worldly wiener dog, has a very similar MO.
Yeah. Okay. If you are using a ticketing website like Brown Paper Tickets or Eventbrite, find the customer service phone number for the ticketing website and put it at every phone in your bookstore so that when someone calls and says, I'm trying to check out and buy a ticket on your thing and it's not working, you can say, oh, great, call Eventbrite. You do not have to be the tech person for the ticketing website that you are using. And I was going to talk really briefly about author comps. So that's like if the author's grandmother lives in your store and wants to come to the event for free, that's cool. The publicist should be able to tell you that up front. You should be communicating with the publicist about whether grandma gets a book or does not get a book. And if grandma gets to come to the event for free, then the publisher should be sending you some comp books. And I would encourage you, and this is me speaking from the experience of having been burned, to set a limit to author comps that is a ratio to the number of tickets that you sold. You don't, for example, want the author to tell you that they are comping 300 free tickets to your bundled event that you have only sold 150 tickets to. Just like maybe you don't want to do that. So, yeah.
I wanted to touch on one ticketing type that we do for some middle grade and picture book events, which are companion tickets. And the way that I think different stores do this differently, but the way that we do this on Eventbrite, because as far as I can tell, it's the best way to do it, is that we basically say, like, you need to buy a copy of the book and you can buy a companion ticket for like $5. It could be more, for $5 and you can go, but there's only one of those companion tickets per book ticket, order. And what I have found is that yes, you can get out of this. And I say on the ticket, like, this ticket type is intended for adults accompanying children. And obviously there are 2 ways to get out of this. One is that you can be a second parent who just makes a second order and gets the cheaper ticket. Another is that you're an adult who doesn't want to buy the book and doesn't like to play by the rules, and you buy a $5 ticket for yourself. But honestly, not many people do that. Like, we have an event that we've currently sold, like 250 tickets to, and I've only seen that twice. So people actually follow the rules more than, and the intention of the rules more than you might think. I think that will depend on the event, but, in these cases, it's frequently true.
Nashville is a city of rule breakers. And if we were to offer a $5 comp ticket, we would sell virtually no books. So we have, and honestly, this is more common for our adult events. So someone like Doris Kearns Goodwin, where a couple wants to come and they don't both necessarily want or need a copy of Doris's new book. The way that we do that is we have a 1-to-1 ticket, and typically about 60 to 75% of our overall tickets are the 1-to-1. And then we have a 1-to-2 ticket, and it costs anywhere from $5 to $15 more. It admits 2 people and includes 1 copy of the book. That way you are saying the value of this event is at least the cost of the book. But if you are a couple and you intend to share the book between the two of you, or friends, or whatever, 2 people, can attend the event for at least the cost of the book, plus this.
So we've done that before too, and it's important. I know with brown paper tickets, and it might be the same with Eventbrite, that will not sort of tick off 2 people. It's just going to tick off like 1 ticket. So if you're keeping track of the number of people, you need to like daily see how many like double tickets have been sold and add those number of people so you don't oversell your venue. Yeah. Because we did not realize that once.
Oh, we're careful. We also are careful to say like upfront, the quantity of each ticket type is limited. Once they sell out, no further tickets of this type can be available, because more often than not, the 2 people, 1 book ticket sells out first. And then people are like, wait, I want the other kind of ticket. I don't want to have to buy 2 tickets. And we're like, sorry, they were limited and they have sold out. Unfortunately, we can't add any more tickets of that type.
Also, there is a space on brown paper tickets and Eventbrite where you can put in a promo code. So sometimes, like if we are using a college and we want to make sure that we opened it up to the college kids at a slightly discounted price, we will give them a promo code that can lower the cost of the ticket.
So we do have a few more slides, but I want to make sure there's enough time for questions because I already saw some hands. So if we want to start taking questions, if anyone had one.
I was wondering, so do most people do ticketing like through their website, like have people pay through their website, or does it add more legitimacy to the event if you do something like Eventbrite?
So the question was, do most people tend to use ticketing through their website and have the payment go through their website, or does it add legitimacy or ease if you go through something like brown paper tickets or Eventbrite?
Much easier. It's so much easier. So it's less about legitimacy and more about having a central portal that is very, like, I think, no offense to our website, but it's a lot easier to look at and understand what's going on with an Eventbrite page than it would be to try to order tickets off of our own web page. So we have tickets linked on our event page on our website. So you see the listing for the event and there's a buy tickets here, but that just leads to Eventbrite and life is better.
Eventbrite also has an embeddable widget in Indie Commerce. You can, I don't think there are any active Eventbrite pages on our site currently, but there's code you can copy into your event listing and it will embed the beginnings of the Eventbrite page in your event listing. And then when they click checkout, it will take them to Eventbrite.
Ooh, and the other nice thing about Eventbrite is that you can automatically create a Facebook event based on that listing. So you set up your tickets. It's like, you want to put this on Facebook? And you're like, yes, I do. And you can also have a permanent link to your overall Eventbrite page on Instagram that just shows up on your profile, like click here for tickets.
And attendees can also request to get a physical ticket or a print at home ticket or an online ticket. Yeah. So those options are there too.
Blue sweatshirt.
Yeah, so my store has had a lot of problems with selling both one-to-one tickets and one-to-two tickets.
Mm-hmm.
Do you guys have any points of clarification besides, saying how many there are that we can use to make it clear to people what the ticket package is?
So the question is, her store has had run into issues selling both one-to-one and one-to-two tickets. Do we have any points of clarification for communicating what the ticket package is? Is that right? I am constantly creeping on other bookstores to see how they are describing what you get when you buy a ticket. I think that Anderson's bookshop ticket listings in Chicago are works of art. And we have cribbed some language from them. So some of our recent listings, I think, are a lot more clear about expectations and what to get. Would you mind being a little more specific about the kinds of problems that you have?
Well, we had 10 frames.
Okay. Okay.
And we had initially announced the tickets for 1-2.
Uh-huh.
And then changed it halfway through to make tickets also 1-1. Now that was a mistake.
Right.
Because you're not getting a front of
Yeah.
But what are the ways that just, that was kind of question. Like,
Yeah.
how do you think about this in the beginning and say, what are people going to need and how are we going to need that?
Definitely, I really try not to make changes halfway through. I mean, like, you already know that, and you unfortunately learned it a hard way. But
sometimes a lot of times it's all about the language that you use. And I think we are all sort of confused with the language we're using sometimes, because are they buying a ticket or are they buying a book? Is it a bundle? Because what's really being bundled if you're just buying a book? But maybe a bundle is the book and 2 tickets. So maybe you use the term bundle in that situation, 1 book and 2 tickets, and use a different terminology for a single ticket. I mean, it's all very confusing because I think the ticketing process in our industry is fairly new.
Yeah.
So we're all sort of working through it together. So it gets a little tricky. But we have had similar situations where we have done the one-on-one, but then felt like we needed to do a 1 book for 2 people option, especially if it was something for really small kids. And it gets dicey because then you also have like the mom with the 2 kids. And what do you do then? Is it a bundle ticket and a single ticket, or how do you work that out? So it's confusing. I'm not sure if any of us up here necessarily have the answers, but we'd love to know if you guys do.
I think also don't be afraid to ask the publisher to make sure they're spreading the news on their social media, and if they can ask the author, because oftentimes that's where a lot of the questions are going to go. They're going to go to the author. And so if they do like multiple posts, about, this is what you get. I've gotten a lot of questions from people, and I just wanted to make it clear because they're also going to get a lot of the blowback too if something goes wrong. And to some people that doesn't matter, but some authors take it very hard when people are DMing them and tweeting at them and saying like, I wanted this and I didn't get it and I had a bad time. So they want it to be clear too. So enlisting them as a partner can only help.
And also say, again, this is where it would be really great if like publishers could insist that all the stores on the tour who are offering tickets do the same thing. It would just make it easier for the author, obviously, because they would only have to answer sort of one kind of question about that. And it would sort of make it easier for all of our stores, knowing that other people on the tour aren't doing something. I mean, I've quickly gone on when the tours come out to see what every other store is doing and been like, oh my God, they're offering it so much cheaper. Oh my God, they're making $20 more than we are. Oh, and you're trying to figure out where your place is in all that. If everybody sort of just was told to do the same thing in a way, it might be easier in this specific instance when it is one of these major tours.
Although I think that's difficult because I think every market is different.
Yeah.
And maybe somebody could do a 600-seater with a 1-for-1 in one city. And if we don't do an optional bundle, we won't fill the seats. And also I think what you need to charge is going to change drastically based on what your facilities are and what the fees are.
That's true.
Should we talk about what to do when tickets are not going well?
Yeah, I think that is important to talk about.
Yeah.
There's one question.
Oh, yep.
If you use like let's say, so we're going to be listing anywhere from October. So on the ticket bundle, obviously 100 for 3,000 seats in there. But since it is a series, you can't really do the seat unless you do 13 points of grad. So how do you bundle that? There might be somebody who's read 13 and 26, and they really want to see them talk, but they're not ready to buy 117.
We've hosted Jeff Kinney twice and been in the exact same situation. The book that you get with your ticket is the new book, and you say everywhere, additional books will be available for purchase. Yep. I mean, assuming he's willing to sign, make sure that you're staying within what he's willing to do. Additional books in the series will be available for purchase as supplies last if you want to guarantee that you get one pre-order now.
So you can't pre-sell them with like
I wouldn't.
No.
I wouldn't.
No. Most people will show up for the author and will get to that book when they're ready. But especially, I mean, if you have a kid's author where you can ticket it, then you can ticket it like that.
Were there any other questions? One more question over there.
That's awful.
I don't know what
situation.
So they would be more than likely getting
the situation.
Oh, yes.
The situation is that they have difficulty selling full-price books with their tickets because there's a big library system in their area that can offer major authors at $20, including a hardcover.
They are probably ordering those books through the publisher's special sales, institutional sales. And I think probably that's all I should say about that. But you are a New York Times reporting store, and your sales count toward the author's royalties, and those sales do not and are not. So that's at least something to bear in mind. That's terrible.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, my instinct is to try to think, what value could you add to what they are already doing so that you could be in partnership instead of in competition? But that's hard if they are dedicated to institutional orders and that. Mm-hmm. Wow. Do you have any perspective as the
can the
publisher help with that?
Yeah, like that's not something I've experienced directly, but I would say, talk to your publisher contact and just let them know that this is happening, because they might not even be aware of it, because especially if like you're working with one publicist and it's another publicist who's setting up events with this library system. Cause I do think like, especially for celebrity authors and especially for major authors, if we're talking about weeks 1 or 2 after the book is out, like the fact that you are New York Times reporting and the library is not, like, to me, that would make a huge difference to me as someone planning events. So I think that's definitely something to play up. And I mean, I don't know what else I would suggest, but definitely make sure your publisher contact is aware of that challenge, because it's possible that your person doesn't know about it and they can sort of raise the alarm to everyone at the company. Yeah. Do you mind if I ask where? Okay. Yes.
I'm a nonprofit with a bookstore.
Cool.
I mean,
do what?
I mean, if you're purchasing a book from a publisher as a nonprofit,
Mm-hmm.
And get that special nonprofit deal,
Mm-hmm.
you can't sell it unless you give it.
Oh, of course. Yeah. You're ordering B2B.
Right. Yeah.
So, I guess they're selling the experience.
Yeah. They're selling a ticket and
They're
not
selling
the
a
book.
ticket, and they're selling a ticket, which again, it's all that terminology again.
Right.
It gets very,
Mm-hmm.
I think
So
we
should
only
we
have a couple
talk
minutes
about
left.
what
We're pretty
happens when we
close.
don't sell
Yeah.
as much ticket?
Yeah, cool. Let's quickly go through
Yeah.
what happens.
Okay.
So I know this doesn't happen to anybody, but every now and then you don't quite sell as many tickets, or your event is not looking as full as it's going to be as full as you would like it to be. So things that you can do to help that. Number one, I would say definitely ask the publicist to tell the author to get on social media and to tweet it, to post it. I mean, to have them emphasize, hey, can't wait to see all of you guys in Pittsburgh. I'm coming real soon. Who's going to be there for me? Anything like that, real informal. It's amazing how that can boost ticket sales. If you have like an NPR station local to you, if you can get that author to be on something like that, or wherever your customers listen to. We have, like I said, there is that little promo code. If you use Brown Paper Tickets or Eventbrite, you might want to go to a school or an organization and say, hey, just for you guys, we have this special promo code. and it will give you whatever off of the ticket if you are desperate to fill seats. You know, you might need to do something like that. What else do you guys do?
Always be upfront in communicating with the publicist your anticipated attendance based on your ticket sales and the size of the venue, so that they know that they're in a venue that seats 1,600 and you've only sold 300 tickets and it's 2 weeks before the event. You never want that to be a surprise. So even if you are only going to get to 500 out of 1,600, you do not want the author and the publicist to walk in and discover that for the first time. Something that we have done similar to a promo code is offered a bulk ticket. So you can get a ticket for $5, but only if you buy 10 of them. Sometimes we call it like a group ticket or a group student ticket or a whatever. We've called it different things. Making sure that the author understands, and this is especially true for celebrity events, that their ability to reach their fans is one circle in a Venn diagram, and your ability to reach their fans is another circle, and oftentimes there's not a lot of overlap. And so we've learned to be very careful to ask upfront with celebrity events, are they invested in using their platforms to reach their fans to promote this event? And do they understand that that is critical to the success of this event? And sometimes that's a conversation that we have to have 4 times, and sometimes they don't, and they are really, really famous, and only 15 people come to their event. And all you can do is have communicated that the whole time.
Yeah, and that's definitely true. Both that sometimes their outreach doesn't end up mattering. Like, there are other factors and it just doesn't work. And sometimes they just, you could sell every ticket if they would post about it, and they will not post about it. And there's not really any way to predict that. So again, communication is the best that you can do. Also, one thing we do that sounds kind of drastic is that we have on occasion moved an event.
Yep.
Into a smaller space. And it actually can be a really good idea. 'Cause if you have 10% of an 1,100 seat venue filled, that feels bad to everyone who shows up. It feels bad to the publicist. It feels bad to the author. It feels bad to the people who are attending. It certainly feels bad to us. If you put those same 150 people into a 200 seat theater and they're still ticketed and they're still showing up, everybody feels good. And you really can revive an event that seems like it's going to be a disaster into something that everyone can take a deep breath and feel good about at the end of the day. So really the visuals matter. And if you can get ahead of that problem early enough and move it early enough, it won't detract from your sales, but it will make your sales look and feel a heck of a lot better.
Know your market. It was interesting earlier when Alex said that they can tell within the first week or two how a ticketed event is going to do, because in Nashville, the story over the last 3 years is that increasingly we can't. We have become a market where 2 weeks before the event, we have typically only sold about 50% of the tickets that we're going to sell, regardless of how early we announce the event and how loud we shout about it. Nashvillians lately just wait until the last minute. And sometimes that means that 2 days before an event, we sell out and then people get mad at us. But it also means a lot of explaining to the publicist, it's okay. We're concerned, but we're not freaking out. Here are all the things that we are doing, and you're updating them constantly. Like, we send a mailing to our teacher specific list. We've got ads running on our NPR affiliate. You're communicating with them all the things you're doing. You're making suggestions about things that they can do, but you're also telling them we have reason to be confident that this is the number we will get to based on where we are now.
Can I ask a question about
Yeah,
that?
sure.
So do you spend literally cash 4 times, 3 times the amount because people are buying tickets later?
No, but
You're
we
doing the marketing again and again and again?
we are changing when we spend. So we are now more likely to boost a Facebook event in the last 2 weeks, because we know that that's when people are more likely to be buying those tickets. We're changing the scheduling of which events we're putting in our NPR ad and when, because we know that that's when people are more likely to be buying their tickets.
And actually,
we're not spending more.
late boosts are something that we do as well, because I think when we've given it a certain amount of time, we can see whether it's going to sell out on its own. And if it looks like it's not going to sell well on its own, those last minute sales from like a concentrated boost can be really good.
Also, when you have the situation where the celebrity is not necessarily promoting it, there's nothing preventing you from going onto their Instagram page and commenting in their latest thing, hey, can't wait to see you in Pittsburgh at, the best bookstore ever, and putting your information there. People will see it. So if they're not going to do the job, you can force their hand.
Yeah.
Is there a certain time frame you're using when you're making like the post for that? Sometimes you'll find out that stuff 6 months in advance, but obviously you don't want us to talk about it that early necessarily because you don't want people to look at it like that. So do you have like a schedule that you follow?
So the question is, what is the timeline for promotion of events?
We used to be like really weird about it and be like, hey, we don't want to tell anybody until like a month before and blah, blah, blah. But I have to say we've learned through the years, start talking about it the minute you get the event. I mean, and just don't stop. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the whole thing. You don't have to pay to promote your posts every time you do a post. You can spread those out throughout those 6 months, but, hiding the fact that you're having the event, which is kind of what we used to do, but hiding that never helps. So, put all those books out in your store with signs about it, put it in your window, put it in every newsletter. You're bound to hit people 6 months ahead of time that you're not going to hit 2 months ahead of time.
Yeah. And especially with the Facebook stuff, it'll remind you. So anyone who has liked it at any point will see it continually popping up. So that's not bad.
So we're actually out of time. I think it's time for lunch. But, I think we're all going to be around, not only right now, but also over the next 2 days. So if you see someone and you have a question for them, feel free to ask any of us. And if you want a copy of the presentation, email Jen at Jen, that's GEN, at bookweb.org. And she will send it to you. Although, as she said, not this week while she's here. And don't forget to rate this session in the app. And I think that's it for any last minute reminders. Thank you guys so much for coming.
Thank you for listening to Booked, the Bookstore Education Podcast brought to you by the American Booksellers Association. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app. Additional educational resources can always be found on the ABA website at www.bookweb.org. Happy reading!